Marvin Devine. I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
Hello, folks. Welcome back. The program is Chris, live in central Pennsylvania. Bienvenue, benvenuti. Ruscot, servus. Bonjour tous. Welcome back to the program. My special guest today is none other than a renowned economist from South Africa, Dawie Roodt. Got an awesome looking background there. I'm going to have to compete with that. Give me just a second here, because that's a pretty good background. I got to change mine just a second. And I want to just welcome to the program and wish him a happy new year. How's that? Or do I look messy? I don't know. Maybe it looks a little too busy now. Maybe my wall looks too busy. I want to go back. But anyway, Dawie, did you have a good New Year's Eve?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Hi, Chris. Wonderful 2026 for you. We were in Europe, but like I said before, this talk is that it is so extremely expensive for South Africans to go to Europe. And things are typically about 3 times as more expensive than in South Africa. And that tells me something about our currency, the rand, for example. That the rand is a hugely undervalued currency. But we really enjoyed it. But wow, I'm much poorer today, I can tell you that.
Undervalued. Wow, I was going to go the other way. I was thinking 30 to 1. Oh, gosh. Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So, the United States and South Africa, this relationship is being portrayed in the press and by politicians, particularly in South Africa. Excuse me, somebody's calling me from South Africa. No, not now. Just had a phone call on my mobile there. So it's being portrayed as contentious and aggressive, yada, 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 back and forth. And a lot of people are saying this is Donald Trump, but I've been telling people till I'm hoarse that this is a problem that dates back many, many years. And for me, from my perspective, having worked in the diplomatic corps and in the military and at the White House level, that this goes back as far as 2001 with the refusal to sign Article 98 waiver for the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute. And from there, over time, it's degraded, and people just haven't paid attention to the relationship. They've kind of ignored it. And it really picked up pace during the Biden administration, and then now it's with Trump in office. It's I guess, in many people's view, come up full speed. But the point here is that, and from an economic standpoint, there's an awful lot the United States could do if it wanted to harm South Africa's economy and South Africa's government. But there isn't an awful lot that's been done. And you wrote a piece last week that got my attention, something I've been talking about, and that's the bond market. And people need to pay attention to the bond market. One reason why the rand is probably a little healthier than people thought it would be at this stage may be because of the bond market. And U.S. and European organizations, banks, insurance companies play a large role in the bond market. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And are we on to something here? I imagine you're going to say yes because you crafted the piece and I agree with it.
Okay, maybe just a step back, and that is that I'm actually surprised that the US hasn't been a little bit more tougher on South Africa because, okay, just a short history. When the ANC came into power in 1994, initially, including myself, I thought they're going to do all sort of silly things and nationalize everything. And actually, in fact, Nelson Mandela, when he left jail, that's what he said. And they didn't do that. And in fact, they started introducing very, very good macroeconomic policies, and especially the fiscal accounts were managed very well. In fact, the Minister of Finance then, Trevor Manuel, he ran fiscal surpluses. I'm not talking about primary surpluses, I'm talking about real fiscal surpluses for 2 years in a row, and they privatized a lot of stuff. I mean, this sounds like a real proper government, and that's what they were. I knew the Minister of Finance, I still know the Minister of Finance then, Trevor Manuel. He did a brilliant job. So they really surprised certainly me and many, many other economists, doing a very good job. But soon afterwards, the real colors started coming through again, and it was very clear that the ANC is actually in the heart of the ANC. There's a bunch of socialists. Their ideological beliefs got stuck somewhere in the 1920s or before the 1920s. The policies are from there, and then the real rot started creeping in the form of cadre deployment or incompetence and corruption. And the ANC started aligning themselves with all sort of funny countries like, for example, Iran, and doing military exercises with countries like, for example, Iran. They just completed a military exercise in the waters of South Africa. So I'm actually surprised that the ANC didn't do much more. or rather, the White House didn't do much more to punish South Africa for obviously moving in the wrong direction in terms of politics, but in the wrong direction in terms of policies in South Africa as well. And I'm actually surprised it took this long before we actually see some action coming from the United States. And it really was the president of the US, Donald Trump, that really started putting his foot down and say, listen, enough is enough. Then, okay, so that's just a bit by way of background. And then maybe I should just give, and this is my expertise, I have been analyzing the fiscal accounts for the past, now this is not a typo, for the past 40 years, Chris. I worked at the South African Reserve Bank. I analyzed the fiscal accounts while working there. I was involved in drawing up the budget many times. And so I think I've got a bit of a good idea of what's going on the fiscal accounts. I can just make a very important point. It is typically what economists will do. You will compare certain numbers, the debt numbers, for example, over time, or you can compare it as a percentage of GDP, or you can look at the deficit numbers, that sort of stuff. But you can't really compare the fiscal accounts in today with the fiscal accounts, say, 20 years ago. And the reason why is that there are many levels of government that deteriorated to such an extent that they've become totally dependent on the national government. Things like, for example, the state-owned enterprises have been run into the ground financially and operationally. The same goes for the local authorities, many of the local authorities. And actually what you should do, if you want to really have a proper comparison over time, you should actually add those numbers to the fiscal accounts of the Minister of Finance. I just want to say, don't just compare the numbers over time, that you can't compare it over time. But let's have a look at the numbers and see what he's going. Well, the fiscal deficit at the moment, or rather the debt numbers, are standing at about 5 trillion rand, which is approximately 74% of GDP. We're running a fiscal deficit of approximately 4% of GDP. The economy is growing at around 1% or so, which then means that the debt to GDP ratio will keep on going up at the rate of about 1 or a little bit more to relative to GDP every year. The total outstanding debt of the state consists primarily of bonds, and the South Africa's financial markets are exceptionally well regulated and very liquid and very modern, I can tell you that. So it's relatively easy to fund locally, and they have been funding locally the deficits quite easily. Approximately 20% of the outstanding debt of the state, let me just rephrase that, just about 15% or less than 50%, 15% is denominated in foreign currency, which is something that the ANC did not break yet. Let's give them credit where credit is due. And the reason why they haven't broken that yet is simply because the local market is so sophisticated. So we have roughly about 15% that is borrowed in dollars primarily. And the reserves at the South African Reserve Bank is more than sufficient to cover that. So we do not have a typical third world forex problem. And that's typical of third world countries. A forex problem, you run out of dollars as a reserve because you can't pay for your dollar denominated debt. But coming back to the normal debt or the total debt, approximately 20% of the outstanding debt, that includes the foreign debt, foreign denominated debt, as well as the locally denominated debt in South African rands, approximately 20% is held by mostly Americans and Europeans. And that is where the real power of Donald Trump really lies. That is the real big stick that he can use if he really wants to punish South Africa. And he can simply tell the Americans they're not allowed to buy our bonds anymore. It's called financial sanctions. And if he does that, then all sort of very bad things can potentially happen. I must also tell you is that recently many things happened in South Africa on the financial markets, and especially on monetary policy, that are mostly good. And we have seen a very nice appreciation in the exchange rate of the rand, and we've seen a very nice fall in the yields on the capital market. But the 10-year bonds are still trading at about 8.5% in South Africa, compared to what's it in the US, about 4 or so percent in the US, depending which maturity you're looking at. But we're still paying a significant risk premium if we want to borrow money on the local capital markets. But okay, coming back to your question, but that is the big stick. That is the real big stick that the US can use if they really want to hurt South Africa, and that's tell Americans not to buy South African bonds anymore.
Well, in fact, this whole argument's going back and forth and back and forth. Now, obviously, I'm biased. I'm an American, but I am objective when I analyze these things. From my perspective, the United States has done virtually nothing to be aggressive towards South Africa. We didn't send an ambassador who publicly called Americans racist and our president the leader of global white supremacy. We didn't refuse to send an ambassador to replace him. We didn't appoint a guy who's tied up in 5 terrorism lawsuits with MTN over Iran cell, Mcabisi Jonas. We didn't impose 70% tariffs on your poultry. We didn't propose automobile quotas on the number of cars you can ship here. We didn't ban your pork products. South Africa did that, and the list goes on and on. What the United States did do this year that could be considered, I guess, aggressive, that's the language that Ronald Lamola likes to use, is we did say, that's it, we've had enough. We've been sending our diplomats to the Sherpa meetings for the past year, along with Argentina. Every time we raise a point, you shut us down. There's no discussion. It's my way or the highway. That's not how the G20 is supposed to work. You also doxed our officials during the year, telling people who they were, which embarrassed us and endangered their safety. So you're not welcome in America. That is one thing the United States did do. But back to your point, I've been surprised that we waited so long to take action in South Africa too. And I'm not advocating we take action against South Africa. That's not my point. I'm just trying to put this in perspective. And you hit the nail on the head. And that's why you and I, it's been a while since we talked, but I really want to get you on to talk about this because people are like, so what can the U.S. do in America? Well, we can destroy your bond market. 20% of your bonds, we could ban Americans from buying them. That would have a devastating impact on the bond market. The good news for you, as you said, is your forex situation is in pretty good shape right now. Your debt to GDP ratio is pretty good. But your economy your economy, South Africa's economy is a mess. It's growing at less than 1%. It's below inflation. It's below population growth, and it needs to be about 8.5% on a sustained basis for about 8 to 12 years just to begin to catch up with the poverty. So this, if Trump wanted to hurt South Africa, he could do it overnight. It would be a run in the market, and South Africa would be in a lot of trouble if he decided to bar American institutions and individuals from investing in South African bonds. Correct?
Well, there is something the Americans did, and that is they included South Africa in this AGOA deal. And there was, I mean, actually, if you look at the South Africa is actually seen as a middle income country, and South Africa shouldn't have been included in the AGOA deal. So this was a huge benefit to South Africa. Still is a huge benefit, kind of. I don't know exactly what's going to happen there, but we were included in the AGOA deal. Well, you're absolutely right. The Americans really did nothing to South Africa. There were some objections to this and that and the other, but every time, or just about every time, when there's an opportunity for South Africa to kick the US, we did that. So, I'm afraid you're absolutely right. Is that if you compare, when you mentioned a couple of examples there, and I can tell you, I can't really disagree with what you've said.
Well, and on that note, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which I think is one of the best pieces of soft diplomacy ever that the U.S. has come up with, but unfortunately, we didn't really apply it. We have rules and standards that countries agree to voluntarily for governance, for providing medical and educational standards and services to their population, and also good governance and rules of democracy. But one of the key tenets of AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which now has expired. It expired at the end of the fiscal year, and they're looking at renewing it or bringing it back, possibly without South Africa, which has got South Africa's attention. That's some good news. But the AGOA Act, one of the key tenets of it is what falls under the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, which South Africa is a signatory, and that is respect for private property rights. The mere introduction of expropriation without compensation in 2018 into Parliament should have made South Africa eligible for AGOA, and it should have, by law, been kicked out of AGOA in 2018. We allowed South Africa to stay there for another 7 years. Almost 7 years, 6 years. And so when we hear this, that the United States is going after South Africa, I find it ludicrous because we gave South Africa a tax-free, a duty-free advantage on 6,000, 7,000 goods and services coming to America, something we get no reciprocity for. We didn't even ask for it.
Yeah. Can I just tell you what's been happening on the South African financial market? It started last year. And I can tell you, South Africa is the most amazing place to invest in. Let me give you a few things that changed, and there's some very important things that changed. One is that, and this is a change in policy, and I think we should credit the governor of the South African Reserve Bank for that, and that is the lowering of inflation targets. And the way that monetary policy has been conducted in South Africa, we've got the inflation target now of 3%. And the Minister of Finance, he really kicked and screamed before he actually lowered the inflation target. Initially, there was a bit of a spat between the South African Reserve Bank and the Minister of Finance because the Minister of Finance did not want to lower the inflation target. It's his prerogative, just by the way. But the Reserve Bank took the lead and said, listen, we're going to lower inflation target. We're going to target 3% from now onwards, which is a very, very good thing. And we can discuss it, why the Minister of Finance was so reluctant to reduce the inflation target. But now we have it. It is down at 3%. And immediately what happened, the rand started strengthening quite nicely. Now, I just come back to the exchange rate. The rand, even at these relatively strong levels, the rand is still a hugely undervalued currency. We're paying a huge risk premium for all sort of things. And you've mentioned a couple of things that we are doing wrong. That's the one. So the rand strengthened very nicely. The equity market did very, very well, but the equity market is still behind its peers. The bond market did very well. The bond market was trading close to 11% to the 10-year bonds a year ago, and it's down 200 bips or so, or even more than that. So the bond market is doing very, very well. There's this optimism in South Africa. You can feel that. South Africa is ready for much, much stronger economic growth. There's only one outstanding issue, that we have the wrong government. We have the ANC in charge with policies like expropriations, their BEE policies, the cadre deployment the policies where they employ incompetent people to misrule and mismanage the municipalities and state-owned enterprises and the like. And that's our only outstanding issue here, Chris. I tell you, if we can get the right government in place, everything, the table is laid out. Everything is ready to go. We need the right government with the right policies, and we're going to grow this economy at 4, 5, 6%, without a doubt. And unfortunately, we don't have the right government, but I think the good news is by the end of this year with the local government elections, the ANC will lose big time again, and then we will get something else. And then I'm sure the economy will react much more positive to this.
Well, I think that we probably agree 100% on that, except our optimism is a little, I'm a bit more of a bear. You're more of a bull on this issue. You know, I think that I agree 100%. South Africa is poised for massive economic growth if only this government weren't there. I mean, just the mere resurrection or repair of infrastructure alone will create billions of dollars of capital outlays, dollars, not rand, because it's fallen to such a pathetic state. The ports are abysmal. The railroads are abysmal. I've looked at the lines cut, the rails stolen in Northwest Province, no longer using rails. People paying all this money to pay for petrol to ship manganese and things to smelters instead of putting it on the trains. It's just crazy. So there's...
Yeah, let me tell you, I've done these numbers. You know, I've had a look at where the South African economy potentially could have been if it wasn't for the fact that we've destroyed the railroads. And we're destroying the roads today because if you force all the trucks on the roads, we've basically destroyed Eskom. Don't tell me Eskom has been fixed. It has not been fixed. That's a power utility. We've destroyed the harbors. You can't export if you don't have harbors. But you know, the good news, and again, I'm trying to be the bull here. The good news is that I mean, you can do so much damage, but eventually you come to a point where you can't really destroy things much more, and you are forced to start doing the right things. And that is starting to happen. That is happening at some places, like for example at Eskom. That's one example. At Transnet, they are being forced to make use of the private sector. We're looking at the harbors, fixing the harbors. So yes, unfortunately, we had to pay a very, very dear price before we get to this point where certain things are certainly being fixed, not because of a change of heart of the ANC, not because of a change in policy, but simply because reality is forcing them to make certain changes.
But Dawie, I want to get your take on this. There's an awful lot of information that comes from the government. This sunny days, bright days ahead sort of thing. You know, for instance, look, our credit's been upgraded. Yeah, you still have junk bond status. It's still a risk. You know, I mean, so your credit rating may have gone upgraded for the first time in 5 years, but there's a reason why you're paying investors 9% for the bonds, whereas you get 3.5% here because your bonds are high risk. Now, look, I chase yields sometimes, and I would consider chasing yields in South Africa because I know they're relatively safe with those bonds. But there's a reason why there's junk bond status. There are underlying macroeconomic problems with this economy that go beyond just the ANC, but they've created. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And again, you know, I'm an economist, and I look at the financial markets. And the financial markets in South Africa are really absolutely amazing. And the positive reaction that we've seen on the financial markets recently will eventually start spilling over into the real economy as well. And we will see a positive reaction on the real economy as well. But the problem is that, of course, I want the Americans to buy our equities. I want the Americans to buy our bonds. Of course, I want that. But I want the Americans especially to start buying and investing in factories in South Africa, in mines in South Africa. But they don't do that. And they don't do that because that's real stuff. That is real economic growth. Yes, the financial markets are all good and well. They are very liquid, very well managed, very well regulated, all of that. But I want you guys to put money in the mines. And unfortunately, as long as we've got Benny Mantashe responsible for the mines, for minerals in South Africa, that is not going to happen. That is the problem. That is the issue. The rest of the economy is ready to go. We have to get rid of the ANC. That's only an outstanding issue.
And now you're talking about the real economy versus the financial economy, the one that people like I chase. And that matters. You know, the stock market in the U.S. can set record highs, but that doesn't mean the economy is healthy. That just means people are chasing investments. And so let's talk about that. You know, I'd be willing to invest some money in South Africa, but I'm not willing to give my equity up just because somebody has a better tan than I do. I mean, not to be crude, but that's unfair. That's racist to make me give my equity up to someone who has no dog in the fight, who has no sweat equity involved, who brings no skills to the table, forcing me to do that because of the problems that South Africa's created. So, I mean, Starlink is a good example of this. They have not even applied for an ICASA license, although everyone keeps saying that they're trying to invest. Until they apply, then it's not even a deal. They're not even applying for a license. And Starlink, of course, at a rather pricey premium for internet access, would bring access to remote areas of South Africa to farms that need it. But it can't come because all the neighboring countries have allowed it, but the South African government won't because they want to turn it into a race issue.
Yeah, and the real beneficiaries here are, of course, going to be the rural areas, but it's going to be poor black people, just by the way. They're going to be the real beneficiaries here. There are two issues, if I may, that I just want to touch on. You know, if you, American, want to invest in South Africa, you buy, first of all, an undervalued currency, a cheap currency. So your entrance in South Africa is cheap. And then if you buy into the financial markets, for example, you buy a very juicy yield. A very, very nice return that you're going to get if you buy there. Now, just imagine if we can turn that around and we can move that into, you guys started investing in factories and things like that in South Africa, what that will do to the South African economy. That's the one point I want to make. The second point, coming back to the bond market, you know, if you look at who the funders are of bonds in South Africa, now they are typically the local savings industry, the insurers, for example, unit trust in South Africa, and the local banks, and of course the foreigners. Those are mostly the investors, the savers, or the investors in the bond market in South Africa. Now, the Reserve Bank about 2 years ago did some research, and they indicated that they're a little bit concerned about how much bonds the South African banks hold. Now, let me just say something about the South African banks. The South African banks are very, very too well regulated, I would argue. They're very well regulated, very well capitalized. In fact, the South African banks are too well looked after. And that means that it's very expensive to do banking business in South Africa. You have to get all sort of licenses. It's very difficult to open a bank in South Africa. But the banks are very, very safe. But imagine the Americans decide that they're going to sanction South Africa financially, and they're going to tell the Americans that they must sell all the bonds. Who's going to be the buyers of those bonds? And eventually, the local banks will have to pick up a lot of those bonds. And remember, when bond yields go up, the values go down. And if the values go down, some of those banks' balance sheet may come under some pressure. And again, I want to point out very clearly, make it very clear, the banks are very well managed. In South Africa, very, very healthy. But if there should be sanctions, financial sanctions against South Africa, it will eventually impact on the financial industry. It will eventually impact on the banks, and that can lead to a financial crisis in South Africa. And we've got experience of this. It happened in the 1980s in South Africa, a similar sort of thing. So that, coming back to your point about the bond market, that is the really big stick that can be used if you really want to hurt South Africa. We have not been hurt yet.
No, not at all. In fact, you know, there are so many things that could be done. You know, targeted sanctions, Magnitsky Act could be applied right now. We don't even have to wait to apply the Magnitsky Act. But let me come back to the contrarian aspect of this again, Dawie. Okay, so I'm an American industrialist. I want to build something in South Africa, which is running out of smelters now. There's no smelters; they're all shutting down. Yeah. So I want to build something there and create jobs. You know, maybe a new automobile factory in Eastern Cape to supplement where VW and others are at, or up in Pretoria and Roslyn. So here's some of the challenges. I just made a couple notes here for myself that I have to consider. I probably have to provide my own electricity because I can't rely on Eskom. It'll damage my equipment with the power going up and down and being out and productivity. I have to provide my own security because I can't rely on the police to protect my property and pay a fortune for that. So I have to hire G4S at a large expense. Then I have to deal with BEE, and I have to give 30% of my equity to a company or to an individual that I don't even know. And then, of course, then you have this wildly fluctuating levels of productivity in South Africa, where you have first world top level productivity amongst Black, white, and brown South Africans, and then you have third world productivity in which people disappear for a week because there's HIV related death and a funeral. They're gone for a week, and people have tuberculosis, and their CD4 levels are low, and so they're sick from HIV, or they just have a poor work ethic altogether because of cultural or educational norms. And then on top of that, we see this with accountancy firms in South Africa where they have to bring retirees back because the university graduates, they're graduating with 40% in math and 50% in science, and they can't even balance the books, and so they're basically useless. I don't mean to paint a picture, but as an investor, those are roadblocks that really make me hesitate to want to put a significant capital investment in South Africa. Now, if I'm Google, I can hire an office building, throw a couple $1 million computers in there and make a ton of money. But if I need to build a smelter or build an automobile manufacturing plant, that's a heavy capital outlay, and I can't be building a factory in Uitenhage, and then out the back door they're stealing all the aluminum I'm using to put the structure together while I'm building it. So I think these are genuine concerns for investors trying to get in the economy.
Yeah, I can give you a couple of more if you're interested in. What is the so-called construction mafia, where you have to make use of certain people and all sort of other mafias that we have in the country. That I'm afraid those are the issues that we have to deal with. I must tell you, I just wanted to make another point. You mentioned the point about this Black economic empowerment in South Africa, whereby you will have to give away a certain portion of your company before you can get a license to operate an internet company, for example. But I want to make this comment, and that we do not have Black economic empowerment in South Africa. We do not have that. What we do have, we've got Black billionaire empowerment, but not Black economic empowerment.
Well, I would call it, Dawie, I would call it cater enrichment.
Okay, or you can call it that as well. Because, think about, you and I, we've got kids. If you ask me what I would do to empower my children, the first thing I'm going to tell you is I want to give them a house where they feel safe and where they're properly fed and properly clothed. That's probably number one, where they're loved. The second one is I want to make sure that they have proper skills, good skills, the best skills in the world. And only very long down the queue will I get to things like, for example, I want them to inherit my business. That's of course it's important. Of course I want to give them a kickstart in life. Of course I want to get my capital eventually to my kids. But the more important things is to make sure that your kids got a father in a house, in a safe environment, and they have got good education, good skills development. Now, I've had a look at South Africa's skills. That's empowerment. That's real empowerment. Skills. And if you look at South Africa, the biggest expense item for the Minister of Finance is education. South Africa spent on a per capita basis, absolutely and relatively, we spend more on education than most countries in the world. If you look at countries like, for example, Mozambique, next door, it's a dirt poor country. They spend a fourth, one quarter, rather, on education than what we spent on education. And the quality and outcome of the education is better than South Africa's. So we've got a lot of money that we spend on education, but the outcome is absolutely horrible. And the reason is politics. That's the reason. And that's real empowerment. Not to take money from one person and give it to the other one. That's not empowerment.
Well, that's theft. That is theft. That's right. And that's what commies love. Commies love that. They love redistributing things, taking from people. But you've hit the nail on the head. We have a similar problem in the United States. We spend more money on education than most developed countries around the world, and our outcomes are uneven. We have some very poor outcomes when it comes to education. But for South Africa, you spend a ton of money on education, and the outcomes are abysmal across the board, whereas neighboring Mozambique and Botswana spend a fraction of that money, and they get decent outcomes. That speaks to a systemic problem in the system. And now it's just going to get worse. I mean, look at this past year. 2025 was a horrible year if you look at legislation in South Africa from a standpoint of liberty and of responsibility in the economy. For instance, the Expropriation Without Compensation Act, which is a violation of Section 25 of your Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. On top of that, the Bella Bill, the Basic Education Laws Amendment, which now interjects provincial level officials into local education and destroys education. And the irony for me, Dawie, of course, your name is from the Afrikaans community, Dawie Roodt. I'm an Anglo-Saxon name, but it's ironic because, of course, the United States, we adopted English, even though we had many languages here at the time. It was predominant. German was stronger in Pennsylvania. We had far more German speakers than we had English speakers. But we adopted English, even though it wasn't official. It just became de facto our language. Now it is official thanks to Trump after 250 years. But South Africa, English English is only spoken by 6% of the population as a first language, yet it's being imposed upon every kid in the country. So when you rock up to primary school as a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, never speaking a word of English, suddenly you're being taught in English. Now, kids adapt, but that puts them at a disadvantage initially, and it's unfair.
Totally.
It's unfair.
Absolutely.
So South Africa's constitution even guarantees that people can be taught in their own languages, and now this violates that tenet.
Yeah. But again, there's a silver lining here.
Okay.
Let me see. And the silver lining is we have this thing called the Tripartite Alliance in South Africa, consisting of the ANC,
COSATU.
the South African Communist Party, and COSATU. Let me just explain what it is. The ANC obviously is the dominant political party, the African Nationalist Congress. The South African Communist Party, they're part of that, of this alliance, the Tripartite Alliance. And the third one is the Congress of South African Trade Unions, which is a trade union federation. Each one of them has got a certain function. The ANC is the vanguard party, as they like to call themselves. It sounds very socialist, doesn't it? The vanguard. It sounds like somebody read it somewhere that Karl Marx could have said. But that's a vanguard party, the ANC. Then you have the home of Labour in South Africa, and that's the Congress of South African Union. It's a trade union, of course. That's their function, and that is the ANC uses COSATU whenever there's an election, because COSATU is very well organized right through the country. So it's a very handy partner to have when you want to fight elections. And then the third member of the Tripartite Alliance, the South African Communist Party, they are the intelligentsia. They provide, and don't confuse that with intelligence, those are two different things, but they are the intelligentsia. They provide the ideological base for the Tripartite Alliance. Now, the Communist Party already made it clear that they are going to fight the ANC in the local elections locally, at the end of this year probably. And the COSATU also mentioned once or twice that maybe they should look for another alliance partner, another political alliance partner. Now, this is crucially important because of this tripartite alliance. Look at education, for example. Most teachers belong to the teachers' union, which is a member of COSATU. And that means that we've got educators in a way, also in government, managing education. So there's no real oversight over education, because you can't tell the teachers, I'm not going to give you a 10 or 15% increase in salaries, because they're part of the Tripartite Alliance. And that's the issue, is that the civil servants largely are members of COSATU, which is part of government. And if we can break that alliance, then I think the stranglehold that the civil servants have over South Africa will also be weakened. There are some calculations. Let me give you another number. We have approximately 2 million civil servants in South Africa, out of a population of 65 million. 2 million of them are civil servants. Not all of them, of course, but they are mostly overpaid and mostly underworked. And approximately 15% of the South African economy is used to pay our civil servants. They are 5% of the population, and we use 15% of the economy to pay the salaries of our civil servants. And the quality of our civil service is absolutely horrible. And education is the prime example of that.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That's dead weight for the most part. That bureaucracy that's accomplishing very. In fact, it's quite the mess. Let me touch on a few things here that are related to this. You mentioned intelligentsia, and you correctly said that doesn't indicate intelligence when it comes to the Communist Party. I don't think the Communist Party of South Africa is going to get many votes. It has 50,000 members. It's just going to be a distraction. Despite all the hot air in the room between Fikile Mbalula and the South African Communist Party leadership, we saw the South African Communist Party leadership mobilize the EFF and COSATU and the Communist Party and marched on the American Embassy this weekend. There were more flies on the dead carcass of a deer on the side of the road here as I drove by this weekend than showed up in front of the American Embassy. It was quite embarrassing for them. Also, speaking of unable to attract flies even, the ANC has become so popular, it's like a sexually transmitted infection at this stage. If you go to Pilanesberg at Moorlang Stadium, a tiny 20,000-seat crappy stadium, as opposed to going to a nice, proper stadium in Rustenburg, the Royal Bafokeng Stadium just west of the town, which seats about 40,000, and there's a reason they didn't go there. One, they probably didn't have the money to pay for it because the party's in such financial disarray. Number two,
that's correct.
Number Number two, they couldn't attract flies. It was embarrassing to look at Cyril Ramaphosa stand there with a handful of people. The excuse, of course, will be that it was difficult to get there. There's just one road. The traffic was backed up for hours. It was incredibly hot. Yeah, but go back 20 years ago, the ANC could have a party and it'd be 45 degrees Celsius and people would be passing out. There'd be tens of thousands there.
Yeah.
Look, the EFF, the ANC, their day is come and gone. Both parties are collapsing. The party that's on the ascendancy is a small party like the Patriotic Alliance, whether you like it or not. I'm not necessarily a fan or opponent. The DA is staggering. It's in trouble because of its policies. It's really a sad situation in South Africa's politics. MK is the one party that's drawing attention, which will do very well in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. Yep. But what's surprising is they're actually doing well in a few odd places, like a few select municipalities and by-elections out in the Western Cape. So that's a bit of a shocker to see. But I'm not so convinced when it comes to this election that things are going to change for the better. I see a lot of fractious coalitions. They've put forward Helen Zille in Johannesburg, and they're about to put her into a proportional representative seat that's open so that she's on the council, and she's back on the council because she's from the Western Cape. But I don't see the DA being able to put a coalition together. They'd have to get 42 to 45% of the vote in that city in order to have a good coalition. Otherwise, it's going to be like Nelson Mandela Bay and how they cut the throat of Athol Trollip. That man was trying to run that city, and every time he turned around, one councillor would destroy that council.
I'm trying to find something positive. But I think a point I was trying to make earlier is that I think what we are seeing is that the tripartite alliance in South Africa is falling apart. That is important.
Well, but Dawie, sorry to interrupt, but we've seen this movie before and it didn't happen. I think this time it's genuine. I agree with you. But when Jacob Zuma was president, when they were trying to impeach him, or not impeach him, when they were trying to give a vote of no confidence, same difference. When they were trying to give a vote of no confidence, the tripartite alliance threatened to fall apart twice, especially Kasatu said, we're done with this. But they didn't leave. I think this time it's for real.
Yeah, okay, so that's one positive. I think the tripartite alliance is certainly under pressure. Let's put it that way. A second thing is, and it's a subtle thing, and that is I got the sense that the political center has moved in South Africa. The reason why I say that, and again, I'm not in favor or against anything. I'm trying to be objective as an economist. I look at the numbers here. But in the past, there's absolutely no way that the South African Broadcast Corporation, the SABC, would talk to so-called right-wing organizations. They won't talk to them. And now it happens every day. They talk to these so-called right-wing organizations. The same happens at various other platforms as well. So it has become kind of fashionable to start talking to so-called right-wing organizations as well. I also have a sense, and I listen to the radio stations quite a lot, whenever I get the opportunity, and I listen to a talk radio stations, and I get the sense that Helen Zille is certainly the favorite when it comes to the position of mayor of Johannesburg. And that's going to be a huge blow to the ANC. So, yeah, I hear where you're coming from. And if you look at the ANC, EFF, MK, that grouping, that incompetent grouping of political parties, their support remains roughly the same of where it was as a percentage about 20 or 30 years or so ago. But I still get the sense that things are certainly moving to the right a little bit for the average voter in South Africa. And I think Helen Zille, that's going to be the big surprise. I think she's going to become the next mayor of Johannesburg.
Well, I love the optimism, Dawie. I mean, I probably hang around with you and make some investments just because I hang around with you. But not to be the one that reigns in the parade. But the problem with South Africa's democracy is that people don't get to vote for Helen Zille. They vote for parties, and then the parties select the mayor.
That's changing, Chris. It's changing.
But it better change before the elections, because in order for that to happen, I would agree with you, she would, given the sentiment in Joburg amongst black and white South Africans in particular, and there are also Indians and colors there, but not as many, but lots of black and white South Africans in Joburg. If the people got to vote, I bet Helen Zille could win the vote outright. She would get a majority, I think, of voters. But under the system it is now, she has to have a coalition that puts her in place. So that's where I'm a little skeptical. Now, let me come back to something here. And you talked about, and actually I will agree with you on this, but then I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I have been encouraged over the past year by South African Broadcasting Corporation's ability and honesty in reporting things that are happening, but then they get pulled back. So for instance, after expropriation without compensation was signed by Cyril Ramaphosa, in a fake fashion after he'd already signed it in December, then made a big splash at Davos. Ooh, look, I'm signing this. But the thing is, he went 30 days, and after 30 days, 1/3 of Parliament can no longer object to it at the Constitutional Court. So he circumvented the Constitution. Nobody's even holding him to account for that. But never mind that. When he did that, within days, people in Shisheho, which is outside of Polokwane, Petersburg, they started staking out property and stealing private property and claiming and demanding services. We're taking this. SABC was there on the ground. They were reporting on it, telling people that people were stealing land. They were expropriating it in a private sense, not the government, but there were no police, no government officials, nobody did anything, no follow-up story. It just disappeared. And there have been a number of stories where they've done it, but every time that the people at SABC run a story that tells the truth about what's happening, it seems to get pulled back. There's no further coverage. But the rest of the media in South Africa, News 24, IOL, Daily Maverick, they continue to run false narratives. And I'm going to come to this one very specifically because it affects the United States. Donald Trump announced the refugee program. They have lied endlessly, repeatedly about this program. And I know this, and I also know that they watch my content because they steal my content and they use it and they twist it and tell lies. And then when they mention me, they want to call me a YouTuber, not a university lecturer, an author, a polyglot, an intelligence analyst, yada, 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 so on and so forth, but a YouTuber. And that's all fine because they're trying to diminish my credentials. But the point here is that they continue to lie about the refugee program. For instance, every time they open their mouth, Ronald Lamola, Fikiri Mabalula, Gwede Mantashe, Cyril Ramaphosa, especially Lamola, who goes on CNN and calls it a white supremacy program because it's only for an Afrikaner. That's an absolute lie. And it has been a lie all along. And any genuine journalist could go to the U.S. Embassy website since the 10th of February and see that it's for Afrikaners, who are the priority, and racial minorities. I've interviewed a family that has a European passport holder, but the primary applicant was the wife, who's an Afrikaner. They have a child with autism. People are being told you can't go if you have disabilities. They have 2 black children they've adopted, and they weren't dirt poor, toothless oaks from the Northwest Province, from the Oud-Transvaal. These were actually wealthy South Africans who were terrorized and nearly murdered in their homes because of their skin color, not because they were rich. And so they fled to America. Yet South African press, not one media organization has even mentioned that interview that I covered dispelling all this stuff. It drives me nuts. They're so dishonest.
Well, I can tell you, we were attacked in my house, in this office where I'm sitting right now, and I was nearly killed. But okay, let me just make 2 comments here. And again, I'm sort of looking for something.
No, you're looking for the sunshine. I'm looking to where I want to put my money, and my money matters to me, Dawie.
All right. Okay. About the expropriation, I can tell you, we have this legislation making it easier for the state to steal people's stuff. And ideologically, I believe that the primary function of the state is to protect me and to look after my things. That's the job of the state. That's why the state is there for. If they don't do that, then I don't need the state. Then I don't need to fund the state with my taxes. But I'm not too concerned about the state stealing my property. But I'm far more concerned about mobs taking property and the state not doing anything about that. That, I believe, is a much bigger threat. So that's one point I want to make. A second point is, I talk on radio stations every day, and I've got a certain slot on the national radio station. Every morning I speak to them. I also present a TV program, and I've been presenting this for the past 22, 23 years, once a week. So I'm on TV and on radio stations very often and very frequently. And of course, I've had some comeback and people sending me hate mail and that sort of stuff. But I can tell you, the way I'm talking about the ANC now, that's my tone of voice when I speak about politics and about economics every morning when I talk to this national radio station, which is part of the SABC, by the way. And they've never have to come back to me and say, listen, you're not allowed to say something bad about the ANC. Never ever has they come back to me. So that at least is some good news. Everything isn't in the pockets of the ANC in South Africa. The news comes out, and the truth certainly does come out quite often.
Well, not about the refugee program.
Certainly not that one. Maybe.
Yeah, well, that's because it's not a good news story for South Africa, and it's embarrassing. But if we could just get Ronald Lamola to go find something else to do, be a goat herder or something like that, South Africa would be much better off.
I'm telling you, I'm so disappointed in him because he was one of the bright stars. He was one of the guys that I thought could potentially take over for Cyril Ramaphosa. But he really disappointed me in his last position. Really, really, I'm so disappointed because I'm thinking about all political parties, not the ANC only. And I'm looking for those bright stars, and there are really so few of them. There are so few of these bright stars. There are a couple. Don't make a mistake here. But really, these really good guys that I thought could potentially take the country forward, like Lamola. He really disappointed me the last couple of months.
Well, Mola disappointed me as the Minister of Justice. I can't speak. Minister of Justice. Yeah, really disappointed me there. In fact, things went backwards. Instead of being a deterrent to crime, they really. So I've been disappointed with that guy for a long time. I also think he's very bright. He's a propagandist, but that's a personal view. I don't want to get you drugged into that. But I do want to bring something up before we wrap up, because we have to wrap up shortly. And that is, once again, the rhetoric's out there. We heard Ramaphosa at Moralang Stadium there in Pilanesberg talking about our revolution. I'm like, dude, the revolution's over. You won. Look around. You're crumbling. That was the first thing. But the second thing that's more important is that now we're hearing the nonsense from Fikile Mbalula, who seems to just make up outlandish stories every time he opens his mouth. We're going to nationalize the Reserve Bank. This would be devastating to let the ANC get its fingers in the pot as a political party over the Reserve Bank. I don't think that's going to happen, but they certainly want to do that, don't they?
It could happen, but just to be transparent about that, me personally, I hold 200 shares in the South African Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank is a weird kind of organization because most central banks in the world used to be private sector owned, but they were eventually over time nationalized. The South African Reserve Bank belong to shareholders. There are certain limitations and so on, but the shareholders only have the right to vote for half of the directors. While the governor and the deputy governors are appointed by the state president. And as a shareholder, I have absolutely no say over policy, monetary policy in South Africa. I get the massive amount of approximately 8 rand in dividends every year. So it's not a good investment. So I do go there as an economist because I get certain information which is publicly available in any event, and they give us some biltong and some nice wine sometimes as well. So that's for the annual general meeting. But there's really no significant benefit for me by having a shareholder in there. If it is nationalized, the South African Reserve Bank, and let's assume the constitution is respected, then nothing will really happen. Absolutely nothing will happen. Monetary policy will continue as is. The governor of the South African Reserve Bank will continue what he's been doing, and he's been doing a very good job. So if you nationalize that, nothing will happen. But that is the question then. So if nothing happens, why nationalize it? And the market feel very uncomfortable about that because they're saying, if you nationalize it, so what's the next step going to be? Is it that you're going to sort of is the Reserve Bank still going to be independent? Will they be allowed to set monetary policy the way they have been? That's the next question. So the nationalization in itself is not the big issue. The big issue is once you do that, what's going to follow? But you're right. I mean, Fikile Mbalula, that absolutely brilliant economist, has been making these kind of noises again.
Yes, he definitely is a graduate of the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, along with Donald Trump. Speaking of Donald Trump, before we wrap up, just a second there. To be fair, I'm beating up on South Africa in some respects here, trying to be the pessimist while you're the optimist. We also have our challenges with our central bank. The Federal Reserve is a quasi-independent activity. And of course, the chairman of that is appointed by the president. It's a presidential appointment confirmed by the Senate. So it's not totally independent, but the Federal Reserve under Jerome Powell has definitely been a thorn in the side of the Trump administration, refusing to lower the prime lending rate, although they have come down 75 basis points recently. But the high interest rates have had a major break on the construction industry and the housing market, which of course is a major drag on the economy. Despite that, the U.S. economy is growing robustly at 4.3%. We haven't grown that fast in decades. That's insane. Amazing. Yeah, and it's a consequence of the opposite of what people said the tariffs are going to destroy America. Yeah. In fact, balancing the table and getting us fair trade deals, is working out very well for the U.S. They're not so well for the rest of the world, but we've been taken advantage of for years. We let the Europeans ship their cars in here at 2% tariffs, while they charge us 10% tariffs, plus they have VAT on top of that.
Yeah, I can tell you one thing is that I absolutely love money. I'm crazy about money, obviously for obvious reasons, but I really love money because I think money was one of the greatest economic inventions of all times. And money has been evolving over time, and it's evolving now again. And if I really get into what I think about money and what I think is going to happen about money, we're going to talk for many hours now. So what I suggest we do, Chris, maybe we can set up another meeting like this, and we can discuss money, because I can fill up an hour just about talking about money, because I believe there's a revolution happening in money, and that revolution is called stable coins, and especially US dollar backed stable coins. And there's talk about another reserve currencies, another payment systems, and this and that, and selling US bonds in order to get rid of US assets. It's simply not going to happen. But like I've said, once I get going on this specific topic, you're not going to stop me.
All right, so we're going to stop it here, Dawie, because you have another commitment in about 6 minutes, and I appreciate your time. You'll talk about your Krugerrands, and I'll talk about my cowrie beads and my shells next time, and we'll talk about money. But we'll do something a few weeks down the road. I'm headed to Texas for a big meet and greet with refugees and South Africans who live in Texas, down in Dallas. So maybe after that in February we can get together. But bye-bye, donkey, for your time, Kealobo. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I enjoy it. And thank you for being the optimist and let me be the pessimist, because my boss, when I was lieutenant, said, Chris, you got to smile now and then. I said, why, sir? He said, you got to convey confidence. And Dawie's conveying confidence. I'm conveying pessimism. But you know what I told my boss? I said, sir, if I make a mistake, people die. He goes, well, Chris, if I make a mistake, people die as well. I'm the commander, and I got to smile now and then too, so you should smile. So I'm going to smile as we finish this up. Thanks, Dawie.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. And bye, donkey for you.
My pleasure. All right, you take care. I'll let you drop off and I'll close up. All right, folks, that's renowned economist from South Africa, Dawie Roodt. He's going to drop off there, and we'll wrap it up here. We've got the news coming up here shortly. Did he get out? Okay, let me help him out there. There we go. All right, so thank you all for joining us here today. I hope you found it interesting. Apologies for the start time. That was a mistake on my part. Dawie and I thought we'd squared a time down because I had other interviews, and in fact, we had not. He has another commitment at the top of the hour. So we started a bit early. If you missed the first 30 minutes, my apologies. Just go back and watch it. It'll be just as fascinating or interesting, I think. Please go back and check it out. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Really excellent audience came in for this today. I really do appreciate it. Fantastic. We peaked out at 702 people, so I appreciate that. But that was really growing as people started coming in. Hopefully they'll go back and watch this from the beginning. We'll talk to Dawie again in a few weeks. That was, I think, a fascinating conversation. What do you guys think? Did you enjoy it? And thank you so much. News will be coming up in about an hour from now, and so I'll get that set up, and hopefully you can join us for the news. And from the O2 Arena on the Thames River in London, this is... No, I'm not really there. But isn't that a beautiful photograph? I mean, check that out. Let me duck out of the way. That is a photograph I took on the cable car that goes across the Thames many, many years ago. And it's just absolutely beautiful. It's a sunset to the west over London. Really beautiful spot there. Anyway, thanks, guys. We'll see you. And my thanks to Dawie Roodt. I thought that was a fantastic conversation. It was fun for me to get to play the pessimist. I enjoy playing the pessimist. But it's good that Dawie's the optimist. When it comes to economics, you have to have some optimism. Otherwise, it all just goes sideways. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later. Cheers.